Let's get to the great Cheryl Chumley, who's standing by. She's the opinion editor of the Washington Times and the host of the Bold and Blunt podcast. She's also the author of the fantastic book, Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. Cheryl, happy Friday to you. Good to have you with us.
Happy Friday, Vince. Thank you for having me.
It is wild to watch this Biden White House and this Biden administration. The Justice Department this week, we've been talking throughout the program, has been particularly out of control, trying to orchestrate sweetheart deals for Hunter Biden, dropping charges for Sam Bankman-Fried, this massive Democrat donor. And now they're coming after Donald Trump again. This is Joe Biden's top political opponent. They're interfering in our upcoming election already, and they've added some charges to go after Donald Trump's maintenance worker at Maralago. What's happening here?
Yeah, they got the property manager, don't they? And I think last time they got the valet, so they're coming on strong for Donald Trump. And look, if anybody at this point does not think this Justice Department is weaponized, targeting Donald Trump and Donald Trump supporters, all with a desperate play to keep him from running and winning in 2024, I mean, your head has to be in the sand, because if you look at just this week's headlines, as you just pointed out, Vince, it's crazy what this Justice Department is doing.
And it's more fodder for the leftist media, for the corporate press, because they love this. They treat this pursuit of Donald Trump as if it's A, legitimate, and B, the most important story in America. It's every little iteration. It's like chasing O.J. Simpson in a helicopter and the white Bronco on the run. It's all of it. That's the way they treat this story. I happen to think that a document dispute is a much smaller deal than the current president of the United States being corrupted by places like Ukraine and China.
Well, I do too, and sane American voters who are aware of the very pro-liberal slant of the media do as well. And if it were the documents that were the issue here, then we need to back it up a bit and go back to Joe Biden and his boxes of documents in the garage in proximity of Hunter Biden and who knows else. We even need to go back to Mike Pence. So, it can't be just one person, one Donald Trump. And he's the reason that our democracy in America is falling. So it reeks of hypocrisy. There's a two-tier system going on here with Democrats. It's blind eyes toward their corruption, and anything that can be drummed up as the odor of corruption against a Republican, particularly Donald Trump, that's what we want to watchdog on as far as the mainstream media goes.
Cheryl, I was speaking to a family member recently who was saying to me, well, is it possible that Trump violated some laws here and maybe he messed up and maybe we should hold him accountable? And I'm saying to myself, wait a second, you have to accept that the Justice Department is legitimate to even begin thinking about something like that. And right now they have demonstrated that they don't have legitimacy and they don't have any credibility given their constant abuse of not just political figures, but of the American people, Cheryl.
Yeah, and the good thing is, no matter how hard the media tries to paint Donald Trump as worthy of the orange jumpsuit and behind bars, his polls keep rising. So the light of optimism here is that while we watch the news, and we watch it all the time, right, because that's our job, and we see how this thing breaks down and how the left goes into all these different rabbit holes, most people in America aren't paying attention to every little allegation that Jack Smith brings forward, or every time a valet or a property manager is indicted over something. Most people know that Donald Trump is under attack, and they're willing to see this thing played to the end. So long as he stays the course and continues his run for the White House, he's not going to lose support.
He apparently said this week, it may have been this morning in an interview, that he said that even if he was imprisoned, it wouldn't stop his presidential run. He'd continue. And that's, of course, his right to. I agree with you. It has increased his support. Every time we've heard another persecution dropped, it is only increased his support in the Republican primary. But I do think that there's a tactic here that's at work, which is to elevate him in the Republican primary, knowing that this kind of attack is only going to make it more likely that he win, but to also dirty him up. You mentioned a moment ago that that a lot of voters aren't going to be following all of the details, and maybe that's what they want. Maybe the goal is just to make him appear like a criminal and hurt him in the general election. Do you think that's at play here?
I mean, I do think that's a strategy, right? But seriously, it's a poor strategy because when hasn't Donald Trump been dirtied up by the left, right? Before he was even inaugurated, if you remember correctly, they were calling for his impeachment. On
Yes.
day one of his inauguration, they were calling for his impeachment. So it's been one constant call for,
Yes.
impeachment and persecution and prosecution against this guy after another. And I think the American people really, at this point, they ought to vote for Donald Trump, not in spite of the indictments, but actually because of them. Because
Totally.
what they're doing to Donald Trump, think of that being you or me or the average American. If they do this with Donald Trump and he goes quietly into that good night and hides in his home and disappears from politics, that will only embolden the left, and they will come for all the Trump supporters well into the future.
It's a good thing for him that he's a billionaire because he can sustain the fight. That's a good thing. I wouldn't be able. I don't know about you, Cheryl. I couldn't sustain it. I wouldn't be able to afford it. I'd be out of house and home. I'd have to settle in order just to rescue my family.
Yeah, and remember, the people who are crying about Donald Trump now and complaining that, well, he carries too much baggage, it's Ron DeSantis' time, he was a good guy for the time, but now it's time for him to leave. Well, first off, the next Republican candidate, the left will do the same too, because one win only emboldens. And second off, how can you complain about Donald Trump refusing to back down now when it was that very principle that won him the White House and that won him such cheers from conservatives in America in the first place?
Well, Trump's obligation now, in addition to winning in order to fight back against all of this, is to gut the systems that are making this possible in the first place. So for those people who are considering an alternative like a Ron DeSantis, my sense is that the reason that they're supporting him is because they love Trump. They voted for him twice, and they're looking at what's left, what happened while Trump was in office, and thinking, okay, these same corrupt systems are still in place. I need somebody who can take them out. And Trump is trying to make the argument right now, I've learned my lessons. I'm going to come in. I'm going to be more aggressive. I know exactly who to go after at this point. But you can see why, to the extent that there is any separation in the field, there's not much. Trump has the overwhelming majority. But for consideration for any of these other guys, in particular people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Ron DeSantis, that's where it comes from, I think, Cheryl.
Yeah, I mean, there's a logical rationale behind that, right? But I just disagree with the premise. I just think that the reason that Trump is so under attack is that he stood strong on his America First principles. It wasn't just a motto to him. And the next Republican who comes into office who tries to do the same will suffer the same attacks from the left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've seen it every time. Every Republican candidate, for a long time, has always been subjected to this idea that they're Hitler, they're going to destroy the country, they're the worst person who's ever run for president. That's the routine. Donald Trump didn't work to placate any of these people, and for that they resent him. He didn't advance their agenda. He's opposed to them on the Ukraine stuff and on and on. And so their desire to crush him only grows.
Yeah, it's the 6 ways from Sunday that Senator Schumer warned about, that the deep state will go after you if you take them on. And that's exactly what's taking place against Trump. And you're right, the point you made a couple moments ago about other candidates desiring to dismantle some of these organizations in D.C. that have been the attack dogs against Trump for so long. That does need to happen. Republicans used to stand in unity about calling for the abolishment of, say, the Department of Education or
Yes.
the federal EPA, and that talk has disappeared. I think it's high time to bring that back. And Vivek, I'm just going to stick with his first name. He is one of the candidates, at least, who is out there talking about it. But I think Trump, this time around, will be on board with that.
Well, you've written the book on this subject, Lockdown, the Socialist Plan to Take Away Your Freedom. But what we're witnessing is these government agencies that have assumed all of this power unto themselves, and these politicians who are playing along with it, by and large in Washington, who are depriving Americans of their liberty. So the reason that these agencies either need to be knocked out entirely or replaced entirely in some cases is because they're all actively restricting our freedom. And they're taking political disputes and turning them into criminal matters. We have people's homes being raided because they're pro-life and they pray outside of abortion clinics. Things have gotten really dangerous, Cheryl.
Yeah, it's really, and you know from previous discussions with me, all roads go back to this. It's the loss of God-given individual liberties. Really, if Americans stood strong, as they should have over the years, for their individual rights and did not allow government to grow and become the provider for all, then we wouldn't be facing these perils from so many different levels right now. The biggest threat America has right now is coming from the globalist bureaucrats, right, who are all too happily working with this White House administration to put in place provisions and agendas that will be very difficult to reel back no matter who the next president is. And if we insist as American citizens that we have God-given individual liberties, then even the President of the United States is our public servant. That changes the narrative. That changes the atmosphere, and that's where we need to be.
Right. You need to readjust your thinking because there's a lot of Americans who want mommy and daddy government to police a lot of stuff, including, so say if they have left-wing political values, it seems those include today not a liberal attitude on free speech. I mean that in the classical way. They want speech shut down. They want debate shut down. They want censorship in all of our public spaces, and they want to demonize anybody who has an opposing view. That is a destructive attitude and the kind of thing that will destroy the country.
Which is all the more reason to get rid of the Federal Department of Education, right? Because this is where that groundswell is being bred. Our younger generations are being taught to hate America, believe America is inherently racist, and therefore America's governing documents must be torn up, shredded,
Yes.
and replaced with something more Marxist in tone.
Yeah, they want us to be convinced that our history is illegitimate. So
Yes.
the other piece is not just the current Department of Education, but what the left has in store for us if they ever get a hold of pre-K, because they've been saying that they want universal pre-K, and they sell it under the guise of, well, look, mom and dad can go to work, and now we'll have all this funding in order to have the kids in school. But what really is happening is that the federal government would then take over the education of our youngest, most malleable minds.
Yeah, and what the frightening aspect is, because what you describe, of course, the left has been lusting for that sort of power for decades, right?
Yes.
But the frightening aspect now is that there are too many parents in America who seem all too willing to give up their parental authority so long as the government comes in and takes their kids and then gives them that me time that they themselves have been conditioned to believe that they're justified in taking. So it's the tone of the parents in America that has shifted. They actually think that government, in many respects, does a better job at taking care of their kids than they do.
Isn't that sad? What a sad
Yeah.
statement. And then lastly, you know, the nature of what the government seems to advance here. And I know you and I are engaging in a very broad discussion now, not just on the Justice Department attacking Donald Trump, but I've noticed that they constantly are trying to enable isolation. They want to isolate kids from parents. They want to isolate kids from one another. Increasingly, kids are not even interacting with one another. They're tied to their devices. You're looking at government efforts, especially on the left, to advance legalize marijuana literally everywhere, to create dependency, to create isolation, to sort of dampen people, to make them less sharp in terms of thinking about their government and less critical. It is nonstop, Cheryl.
And didn't the face mask play into that agenda so very cleverly, right? Which is yet another reason why I detested the whole face mask movement and so forth. But look, what it's really about, it's about tearing down the idea of humanity, right? It's about making it seem as if you're just alive and functioning to serve the state.
Yes.
Instead of alive and functioning because God created you in his image and you were given a specific purpose and mission on life in order to glorify him. And so that's really what it comes down to. It's about stripping humanity from humans so big government can come in and instill them with the idea that their purpose in life is to serve the collective.
Well, God bless you for saying everything you just said and for constantly being such a good warrior for human decency and our country. Thank you, Cheryl Chumley. I really appreciate your time today.